Thank you, Todd, for a sort of chicken talk. Are there any questions? Yes.
Okay, along with the chicken talk. Okay, so I watched this video of a neuropsychologist. I think he was a I think he was just a neurologist. I don't know. He was something, studies the mind. And you know, his take on it, and it wasn't just his, I've heard this by others, is that humans are hardwired for biases. You know, we have the group that we're in, and evolution wise that benefited us. And so if you're not in that group, you're suspicious of them. And we're just hardwired to think that way. And you know, I've had chickens too, when we were growing up, and sometimes the chickens are quite mean and will kill another chicken. And humans do that too. We get quite mean and people kill other. So I you know, it's this idea, and I think I've asked this question before, but apparently I need to ask it again. So this idea that my true nature, well, maybe my true nature really is to drop, you know, humans, not mine person, humans. Maybe the true nature really is to drop bombs on each other. Maybe the true nature of the chicken is to kill other chickens that might interfere with their ability to reproduce or whatever, you know, just like humans do. So this idea of true nature, perhaps are we trying to be something that we're really not? And that's my question.
Yeah, so true nature is before thinking, is before speech, is before species, it's before planetary system, it's before galaxy. True nature is something that everyone shares. So, you know, people who give sort of like evolutionary reasons for behavior, we're hardwired to kill each other. And you can see it because certain apes go around killing each other, and chickens go around killing each other, and you know, ants of different, you know, nests will go kill each other, and so on and so forth. And that's proof that it's hardwired. So this is things like this are something called just so stories. Do you remember Rudyard Kipling, that late 19th century, early 20th century British colonialist author, British imperialist colonialist author? He had a collection of stories called Just So stories. And, you know, like how the elephant got its trunk. So the elephant got its trunk because it was fighting with somebody, I forget who, maybe a snake, maybe a fish, I forget, and it grabbed the elephant's trunk and pulled and pulled and pulled, and the elephant pulled and pulled, and suddenly the elephant had a long trunk. Okay, so that's a just so story, something you make up to explain things so you can feel better and you can think you understand something. So your true nature, anyone's true nature, which belongs to everyone, is not part of a story like that. Yeah, maybe that evolution sets us up in certain ways, but we don't have to succumb. We're not chickens. We're human beings. And we have this, not only do we and all beings have this innate Buddha nature, but we actually have awareness of this Buddha nature. And so we can let that shine. We don't have to say, oh, well, we're hardwired to drop bombs and shoot AK-47s or whatever it is. I don't know, did I get the number of that gun right? We don't have to say, I'm hardwired to do that, so I think I'll go do that. We don't have to do that. We can say, oh, I recognize the humanity of these people that I'm pissed off at. And recognize their humanity I show some kind of restraint. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, don't fall for it. Just, it works the other way too. What is the thing, like, women get menopause so that they can stop having babies and then can take care of their grandchildren? Okay. As someone who spent a lot of time taking care of my granddaughter, that's a just so story, right? It's designed to keep women in their place. So, all right. Don't do just so stories. Whenever you hear that kind of explanation of something that you can't possibly have evidence for it, there's no actual evidence that one could say this is incontrovertible. They're going to find what? Some kind of cell in your brain that fires, in a certain circumstance when it's dropping bombs. That's the dropping bomb, neuron. I mean, always ask yourself, what kind of evidence is that? And also, does it make people feel good about themselves? Does it make people feel justified in their actions? And if it makes people feel justified in their actions, then it's made up. It's always that way. So thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes?
How do you deal with being sleepy on a retreat?
Wait, I couldn't hear you.
How do you deal with being sleepy on a retreat?
How do you deal with being asleep on a retreat? Oh, man. When I was starting out, I'm an owl. I'm a night person. I'm the last person who ever should be practicing Zen. I should be doing some weird cult that meets, at midnight, and, midnight to 2 in the morning. I'd be really happy. Yeah, so it's really hard. It's really hard. I'll tell you something you should not do that I used to do. If the retreat was big enough, I'd go to the head Dharma teacher and I'd say, I'm skipping lunch so I can take a nap. I understand that desperation, that desperate feeling, that just desperate feeling of, oh my God, I've got to sleep. So the way you deal with it is when you can, you do sleep. We have plenty of rest periods, and in each rest period you can get somewhere between 20 and 50 minutes of sleep, So you can do that. That's the first thing. And the second thing is to appreciate what lack of sleep on a retreat does. It's actually very functional. And the way it's functional is that all the kinds of protective behaviors that we have, mental patterns and physical actions that we do to kind of keep ourselves in equilibrium and keep ourselves from certain kinds of mental suffering, those are not there, right? I mean, it's like you become very raw. With lack of sleep, people become really raw. And then the question is, how is this used? So there's some cults, and this is part of what makes them cults, that use that raw state to manipulate people, to keep them from ever questioning, to keep them from leaving, to keep them from whatever. Use that raw state to manipulate people. Keep them handing out pamphlets on a street corner for 20 hours a day or something. So you can, if a group lacks a kind of ethical standard, then they can manipulate people who are feeling that rawness. But we're not like that. What this rawness is something that you can use. And you can use it to look at the things that we usually don't want to look at, because that's what it's about. It's sort of, you can't not look at these things that we might not want to look at. When you sign up for a retreat, we always have people say, I know that this might be really, hard, and I might have a really hard time, and, I understand that there's risks in this. That's why. Because sometimes when people are really unstable, they can't do it. They just, the things that come up when they're raw like that are just, they can't deal with them. And so we want to let people know that this is not, oh, a Zen retreat, it must be so relaxing. We want people to know this is hard work and you will be challenged. And it's you yourself that are challenging you yourself. And so in this state of exhaustion and in this state of, oh my God, I mean, first of all, rest when you can, absolutely. You want to keep functioning. But the other thing is appreciate it. That is giving you an opportunity to look at things that ordinarily we will not look at. We'll do anything to look at them. And then there they are. And you're in a situation where you're not only encouraged to look at them, but everyone else is doing the same thing. And there's a kind of support. It's a very safe place to do this. You know, that's another reason why we don't talk, is because then we can't reify something. Something appears and you can't run and talk to somebody and then it becomes really real. But it just appears and you look at it and whatever happens, happens, but you're not making it part of a story, you know? So the silence is like a container. So we're a safe container where these things can happen because everybody is going through it. And what I really find interesting, and looking around the room right now, I can see it, is, I mean, you're already young, but everybody looks younger. I mean, we're going through all this really tough mental stuff, but everybody looks younger. It's like, even with all the exhaustion and the physical difficulty, sitting still is one of the hardest things people can do. It's really hard on your body. Even sitting in a chair, just the fact that you're still is hard on your body. And then we have those prostrations, we have all this stuff. So it's physically hard, it's mentally hard, but somehow people open and they look younger. It's really interesting. You know, it's like the lines kind of reduce themselves a little bit. The posture eases a little bit. The smiles are a little bigger. Now that I'm saying that, of course, I can't smile because I'm thinking about smiling, but yeah. So yeah, exhaustion is a part of that. And every serious spiritual practice, when, you know, has, I mean, if you're like a Catholic monk or a Catholic nun or, you know, a Zen student or any kind of meditation retreat, whether it's Buddhism or you know, Hinduism or whatever it is, anything like that, exhaustion is a big part of it, and it's functional. It's very, very functional. Because, you know, when we have that thing that says, if you can break the walls of yourself, that's one of the techniques for breaking the walls of ourselves. But yes, it's uncomfortable, and I really do encourage everyone. I mean, certainly I do that. You know, I just go whenever I can. I sleep because it's just exhausting. So yeah. So thank you very much for your question. And I'm sure everyone in the room is saying, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Are there?
Also beds upstairs.
Oh yeah, did you know that there are beds upstairs for people? Yeah.
They'll have their own rooms and stuff, so I didn't know.
Oh yeah. We should have a bed up there for you, or you can stay on the couch. Yeah. We have 2 couches for that too. Any other questions? I think it is very practical. It never occurred to me.
You know, you started the retreat saying like this is a silent retreat, but only up here.
Uh-huh.
Really?
Okay.
Thank you for starting the retreat that way.
All right. Anything else? Yes.
This is my question to begin with, but then the talk gave this other question. So 10 years ago yesterday, my sister died, which was very difficult. And I never found really any help with any of the Zen stories, because all the Zen stories, and I thought maybe some of the women stories would be different, but I found that they're not. It's all, if somebody dies, it's all don't cry. Don't cry. You have to, there's kind of an admonishment. And even and that's in the past, but even in there was the nun in the school that died. It was a tragic accident, hit by a drunk driver, I think. It was really tragic. And some of her students, or some of the people who knew her, wrote these articles in the primary point. And several of them said that as well, that they knew that she wouldn't want them to cry. And I just wonder why Zen has such a problem with crying. And I know there's the one story of the woman, the Zen master, that does cry, but she suddenly stops and says, well, I'm not crying for me, I'm crying for my granddaughter. And at the, yeah, I'm not talking about that kind of crying that you can stop when somebody tells you you need to stop. It's that crying that you can't stop until it's just done. And there's nothing in Zen that says that that's okay. In fact, it almost says, no, you shouldn't be doing that. That is something wrong.
When I die, please cry. Cry a lot. Okay?
Yeah.
So these Zen stories are not the whole of Zen practice. And there were people who talked about Myung-Hae Sunim's death, talking about their grief. There were also stories like that. And the story that you're referring to, it's Satsyo, who was a student of Hakuin. And she was a lay person, and she lived a lay life. But as a young girl, she was sort of a Dharma genius, like Mozart or something. As a young girl, like she was like 7 years old or something, she sits on the sutras. And her parents come in and say, what are you doing? What are you doing? And she says something like, well, these are only words, they're not real, something like that. And so they drag her over to the local Zen master, who I think at that point was Hoffman. Certainly later she was a student. And he says, oh, you naughty girl, people don't understand this. So, don't act that way. Just act like a normal person, okay? And so, but she gained a reputation because she practiced very hard. And Zen Master Sungsan sort of grabbed the story, put it in Tang Dynasty China, and called her Sul, but it's actually Satsyo, 17th century, I believe, Japan. Maybe 16th, I never know these things. And so she lives this, normal life, and but she has this reputation, and she's not formally a Zen master, but she's recognized as a woman of great Dharma accomplishment. And then her granddaughter dies, and she's crying, at the funeral. She's crying and crying and crying, and somebody says, you're Zen. Why are you crying? You're not supposed to feel anything. Right? And she stops, she says, the tears are not for me, they're for my granddaughter, and then she cries again. So Zen practice means take in everything. When you're grieving, grieve. When you're happy, you're happy. When you're sad, you're sad. When you're depressed, you're depressed. When you have energy, you have energy. Whatever it is. If you're shy, you're shy. If you're bold, you're bold. There's no good, there's no bad. You just completely attain whatever it is in that moment. But then you don't hold on to it. So that's really important. You don't hold on to it. So I speaking as someone who barely knew Myung-Hae Sunim, I mean, I'd met her once or twice. She visited us on Zoom. Some of you might have remembered that amazing talk she gave, and she's actually on our YouTube channel. It's worth looking up. This is about a month before she was killed in this horrendous crash. She and another woman, the other woman was driving, were behind a truck, and another car was speeding and pancaked them into the truck. The Polish news actually had photos of the crash scene, and you couldn't see how many bodies could be gotten out of the car because it was pancaked. It was horrendous. I know I felt a stab of grief, and I barely knew her. She was luminous. She was amazing. You have to look her up on our YouTube channel. Certainly those who were close to her, they must have grieved terribly. How could you not? When Zen Master Sungsan had a student, Sihor Liao, who became Subang Sunim and then became a Zen master, and they were very close. Zen Master Sungsan and Subang Sunim. And Subang Sunim died very suddenly of a heart attack. And I know, how Zen Master Sungsan, it's like, stabbed with grief. It was like, I think he thought of Subang Sunim as he was going to be his successor. And then suddenly he's gone like that. Died at the age of 52, I think, giving an interview to a young girl, a 12-year-old girl in Hong Kong at the Zen Center there, at the Zen Temple, just killed over, boom, instantly. And I know that Zen Master Sungsan grieved. So I don't know why people say, I know she wouldn't want me to grieve. I know that young Hae Sunim, was filled with joy. She had a very difficult life physically. I mean, she had a lot of physical problems that she had to work on really hard in order to function, but she was just filled with joy. And maybe that's a way of saying, she was filled with joy, so she would want us to be filled with joy. Even as we're grieving, be filled with joy. So, I can't speak for other people. But when you're grieving, grieve 100%. And you know how grief is. It appears, and it goes away. And it appears, and it goes away. And it appears, and it goes away. So your sister died 10 years ago? Yeah. So over those 10 years, all of a sudden you'll see something and, you'll be stabbed with grief again. And then it goes away. I remember when my first baby died, and I wanted to, if I went out to eat with friends in a restaurant, and I'd want to get up on a table like an Old Testament prophet and say, "Everyone will die." That. But I didn't do that. The tables were too high, I couldn't get up on them. But so, and then, every now and then something just appears, and then, you get that little stab of grief. That's okay. It's when we become consumed with it, when it becomes about us, not just simply a natural thing that's passing through us and an homage to the person that we loved, but it's when we hold on to it, it becomes our identity, That's when it's a problem, when we can't function because of it. And I mean, there's a place for not functioning. What is it that after your spouse dies, or your sweetie, someone you've been with for a long time, it's supposed to take 1 year before you do anything like buy a house or do anything serious, because your mind is this process where magical thinking process where you just can't think straight. You may look like you are, but you're not. But it's not, you can't avoid it. So just, don't worry about Zen stories. And the other thing about Zen stories is that our minds give them this meaning. in themselves, what are they? You know, bunch of people interacting with each other, and then we give them meaning. You know, Kangen practice is cutting through that meaning. Just cut through it completely. So if I ask you, you know, Satsuyu's grief, you know, what was it? Was it Zen or not? You would not go in, I'm not going to ask you to answer that, but you would not go on a disquisition about how it is Zen or it isn't Zen or like that. You give an answer that came from a completely different place. Maybe I'll ask everybody that tomorrow. I don't know. But yeah. Yeah, so just 100% completely live your life. And that includes not, you know, not hanging on to something when it's past. We do that all the time. You know, Todd mentioned that. We're always doing that. But when it's present, it's there. There it is. And then when it's not there, there it isn't. Then something else is there. Okay? So, if you ever want us to chant for your sister, like on an anniversary or something, we can do that. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions?
I'd
Yeah.
like to make some comments.
Okay, make them loudly and I'll repeat them so Liz can hear.
So, I've been to 10 years every summer sitting in Providence Zen Center.
Okay, so for 10 years you've been sitting in Providence Zen Center?
4 weeks. We sit 9 hours a day, and if you have jobs, you sleep about 3.5 hours.
Okay, we sit 9 hours a day there, and if you have a job, you sleep very little.
And so as a modern version of the story, it's not a story, that's actually, if you go there every single summer, and pretty much it's the same crowd of
Okay, so every single summer it's pretty much the same crowd.
and sit in silence, and many we never talk because you don't have an opportunity to
And you
talk.
sit in silence, there's no opportunity to talk.
And then next year they come, and so it becomes a very intimate connection. with
So it's
all
an
people.
intimate collection of people.
Yeah. And many of us cry.
And many people, thank you for mentioning that, yes.
We sit there for a week.
And many
take
people
turns to
cry and
because
take
you-
turns crying.
And then the others will say, okay, you only need to clean one bathroom, you keep crying, I'll do the rest, you know. So
And then people step in to help each other out.
Every year,
Yeah.
men, women,
Yeah.
older people, younger people.
Everyone
teachers
helps. Everyone
cry.
helps.
You know, down
Yeah.
talk, cry nonstop. And
People-
circle talk that last summer.
Everybody cries, teachers,
Including
including the monks. Everybody cries, okay?
So it's not true that Zen people don't cry. Zen people cry a lot. That's why
Yes.
I'm surprised to hear this, because those are ancient stories. We don't really know.
So Zen people cry a lot, okay?
So if we're talking about practice, actually practice experience.
We're talking about practice
Because
experience.
you're melted, your fences all down.
Yeah, you're melted, your defenses are down, right.
It's like certain yoga poses, you start to lay there and you start to cry.
Certain yoga poses make you cry, okay?
Really, so that's a big, huge misconception.
Yeah,
That
it's a misconception.
The whole process, if you sit long enough, that's what's going to happen to you. Things you suppress, do not want to see, your fence just keep on melting.
Yeah, if you sit long enough, then things you want to suppress are no longer suppressed.
Right.
So we're going back to Evelyn's question.
Evelyn says
Yeah.
that what are we doing? You're supposed to be sleepy.
Yeah.
And none of the one questions will be correct on the first week, because you're not sleeping.
On the first week, how about the first 5 years?
When you are sort of went into the fourth week, your body is adjusted. You're constantly in this kind of, you're sort of asleep, but you're not asleep.
Yeah,
So
you're
eventually you practice long enough, you learn to sleep on the mat. That's a term, and then you cry on the mat.
So you learn to sleep on the mat, you
And
cry on the
nowhere,
mat.
It's a very safe space.
And it is a safe space.
And you are very comfortable, and you just cry. This is
Yeah.
when you cry. Nobody tries to suppress.
Yeah, nobody wants to suppress you.
Lots of tissue paper there.
That's right.
Over there.
There are lots of boxes of tissue paper. Yeah, I have one in the interview room for that reason, yeah.
So this is not anything like what the story says, but
Yeah.
I think that people just don't write about that. And Myohei-san is supposed to be a very close friend of me, and she's the only person who she will speaks to me in Cantonese, which is my family's language, but I don't speak that language.
So
I don't
Myung Hae
understand.
Sunim used to speak to you in Cantonese,
Right,
yeah.
and then I answer in English. It's a very bizarre situation. The Caucasian talk to me in Chinese, I'm answering in English, right?
So a Polish
And
woman
I
talks to you
sat
in
with
Cantonese
her
and you
to-
respond in English, okay.
And when she dies, a lot of us went through so much grief. I went
Oh, yeah.
to a solo retreat and I chant Namo Amitabha and I bow 5 rounds at midnight and chant Namo Amitabha at the same time. Tears just come and
Yeah,
come and
you-
come.
yeah, so-
I mean, those of us who do that, we didn't have the emotion. We're not strong enough to actually think about to intellectualize this process, to write it and to send it to Ken Cassell to publish in time.
Okay, and you don't send it to Ken Cassell to
You don't
publish in
read those
Primary
things.
Point, yeah.
You
Nobody
have
reads those things, yeah. Yeah, I would like to
before language, actually.
yeah,
You can't
yeah,
recall
that's
that.
right, it's a grief
Right,
that's
before
before thinking. It comes really from your Tian Tian, yeah.
So here's my yoga master. The first time I ever cried in public was in yoga. I was just doing this pose.
So you cried in yoga because when Todd was the teacher. Okay, all right. So yeah, I once had a retreat that I was sitting with Bobby. I already had Inca, and I was sitting a retreat with Bobby for 1 week in Colorado, and I cried the entire retreat. And at the end of the retreat, you know, it's like people don't notice that you're crying because you're silent, you know. And at the end of the retreat, this guy who was sitting at the opposite side of the room, he said, you know, every time I looked up, Judy's face was shining. And I thought, yeah, the light was reflecting from the tears. That's what was going on. I didn't say anything. But yeah, thank you. That was a wonderful, I hope you heard some of that, Liz, because it was really, yes, exactly. Retreats give us an opportunity to whatever it is. And as I said earlier, to not name it, not put it in a box, not, you know, put it tidy and then put it on a shelf, but just completely let it go through. And yeah. Although I think saying that, you know, by the second or third week you're answering Kangens, well, speak for yourself. You know, but yeah. Yeah, Kangens are, you know, we have some people here who are relatively new to Kangens, and as those of us who are not know, they're designed to not make they're designed to help us break out of our usual responses, and that makes them, it's not that they're complicated, because they always turn out to be very simple, but it's simple in the sense of playing Mozart. You know, if you know classical music, you know, like somebody like Rachmaninoff, somebody plays Rachmaninoff, say, oh, that's so hard, oh my God, you know, look at the fast they play and how loud they're playing and everything. But you play something like, you know, Schumann's Kinderscenen, these are pieces made for children to play. They're really hard. They don't sound hard. Mozart often doesn't sound hard, but they're really hard because they're so simple. And we always want to add things. We always want to, you know, put things in. And that's what we do with Kangens. We see that. We're grappling with this question that we have no idea what it is. You know, what is the teacher expecting, right? What does the teacher expect? That's a big one. What am I supposed to do? You know, sometimes people come in for their first interview and they say, what am I supposed to do? And I remember when I was training, you know, after I received Inc, and then you go through like 6 months to a year of apprenticeship where you do interviews sitting with other people. Now it's easy because people do it on Zoom. It's very easy. But back then, you know, you had to travel. And I remember traveling to Cambridge Zen Center, and Jane Dobish was giving interviews, Zen Master Bon Hae, and a woman walks in and says, you know, what are we supposed to do here? And Jane looked at her and said, you'll find out. And that's a good attitude towards life. You know, what am I supposed to do here? Find out. You know, that's what don't know is about. Find out. Don't you have these little preconceptions where, you know, you're going to try to grab the whatever it is before it has even appeared. So yeah. So thank you. Yeah, this is, yeah, don't be afraid of emotions. And yeah, Zen has this kind of macho image, but that's not what it's about. You know, my favorite My favorite of the traditional stories is Amdu's dying. And I've told this story to a lot of you, but I'll tell it again. So Amdu, Yantu is the Chinese, he was one of the very early ones, 8th century, maybe early 9th century. And he was a Daksan student. And China was really a mess. This is the end of the Tang Dynasty. And it's like Syria, it's like Somalia, it's like every, country that goes through convulsions. Except China was large enough that, this part would have a convulsion for a while and this part would have a convulsion. But everything, the government didn't have control. There were, invaders from the south, from the north, from the west. There were, the Tibetan Empire was huge, and they were always invading China, and then the people from the north were, it was just, and you had famines, you had droughts, you had locusts. They actually had locusts. They were deforesting, so you had, destruction of nature. You had tremendous pandemics. I mean, and then you had all these warlords and these bandits. I'm not sure how you tell the difference, but the reason why Zen monasteries were at the top of mountains was not for the view. It was because that was the safest place to be. You're on top of a mountain, you can see who's coming. So there were all these warlords and bandits coming, and destroying and pillaging and killing and raping and the whole stuff. And in particular, they really liked Buddhist temples because there was all this gold, gold statues, not, not painted plaster like we have, but, real solid gold statues and stuff like that. And, and so Yantu is an old man by then, and some monk comes in and says, they're coming, the bandits or warlords or whatever, they're coming, they're going to attack the temple, I see them down the road. And so all the monks go to hide, and Yantu is sick of this. And he says, I'm not moving, I'm not going anywhere, I'm going to sit. And he sits there in front of the Buddha, and the warlord comes in and takes out his sword. He says, I can kill you. And Yantu doesn't say a word. And there are two traditional ways these stories end. There are a lot of stories, like I said, two traditional ways that they end. One is that the warlord or bandit or whatever he is sees the equanimity of this person sitting there and drops his sword and says, I am so sorry, my life has been wrong, please accept me as your monk. That's one version. And the other version is that the warlord runs the guy through, and the guy dies without moving, without opening his eyes, without a sound, just dies, But in this story, which is why I like it so much, Yantu screams as the sword enters him. And he screams so that it can be heard for 20 li. And I looked up what an li, what a li is, and 20 li is about 6 miles. Can you imagine somebody screaming in Eudora and you hear it here? So, Yantu screams. And this is Tang Dynasty China. Then you go all the way to, I believe, 17th century Japan. As I say, I'm never too good on these dates. And you come to Hakuin, who's a young Zen monk. And, everyone has this idea, like, you were kind of alluding to, Evelyn, that, Zen means absolute imperturbable. Nothing will make this mind move. I am always serene. I am never unhappy. That kind of idea of what Zen is, makes you into like a piece of wood, right? Study hard enough, you'll become a rock, okay? So Hakuin, he's a young monk, and he's thinking that, Zen will bring him relief from suffering in the sense that he'll never suffer. And in the sense that, he'll be imperturbable, he'll be totally equanimous all the time, right? And he hears a story and it sends him into a real spiritual crisis. I mean, he does not know what to do with himself for years. And he tries to talk to, the senior monks. He travels all over the country and no one can help him. And then finally he meets this Taoist monk who tells him this meditation practice, which it's always translated as imagine butter melting on your head, but I don't think they had butter in Japan. So, but something like that, some kind of fatty substance, that's melting on your head. And just do this practice, forget Zen, just do this practice. And then that cured Hakuin. And then he became this very, very, very great Zen master. I mean, he's just a giant. He completely reformed Rinzai Zen in Japan the way Dogen had done 500 years earlier with Soto. He just completely reformed it. He was a real giant, but it's a spiritual crisis. If he hadn't had the spiritual crisis, he'd just be, another monk, So I love Yan too, because that scream was not just heard, 20 miles away. 6 miles away, rather. 6 miles away. It was heard like 1,000 years later, 900 or 1,000 years later. It's still, and it still does, it still reverberates. So, yeah. So, it's how do you deal with suffering? It's not to not have suffering, it's how do you deal with it. That's what's important. Because suffering will happen, guaranteed. And then the question is, how do you deal with it? And how do you deal with other people's suffering? So that's a good place to stop.